After the big update for Flight Sim 2020 on February the 16th, I had a fly around an area which I know well from the air in real life. I wanted to see which simulator best represented the real world and whether or not they could cope with the demands of flying low-level VR in fast jets. I also wanted to find out if the update has fixed the issues that have been spoiling my low-flying experience. Right from the start we can see there is a big difference in the lighting levels in Flight Sim 2020. This certainly makes the ground detail stand out much more, but the erratic water reflections have not been improved by the latest 40-odd gig update. Although I have set clear skies and around about midday on both sims, X Plane does appear dark in comparison to Flight Sim 2020, but the water reflections are certainly less distracting. As we wind our way up Honister Pass, it does appear slightly grainy and less detailed than Flight Sim 2020, but the colours do look exactly like the Lake District, with a mix of the rusty orange of dead bracken, the brown of the heather, and the grey slate that lines the steep-sided valley up the narrow pass by the slate mine at the top. As we roll over the top of the pass, the landscape on the other side changes completely as we enter the top of Borrowdale Valley and set up for a tight right turn to Seathwaite. You will notice some flashes from the Oculus Rift VR headset as we switch to Flight Sim 2020. This is down to an Oculus update that I have since realised only happens if you are running in beta mode in the Oculus software. Entering Honister Pass again, there are more pine trees on both sides of the valley and even on the very steep grassy and rocky Fleetwith Pike. There are no trees here in real life. Then all of a sudden the light becomes so intense that what should be a dark slate grey Honister Pass changes to a shade of pink like something from the Grand Canyon. Back to X Plane. In the Just Flight Hawk, making the tight right turn up Seathwaite Valley is slightly trickier at 400 knots compared to the 350 knots in the MB339. Compared to X Plane11, Flight Sim 2020 has a disappointingly small selection of aircraft available. There are no helicopters in Flight Sim 2020 and only 2 military jets. As we round the corner, I was disappointed to see that the rivers stand out way too much and still appear to be bursting their banks, something that I hoped the update would have fixed. Although the colours look authentic in X Plane here on Styhead Pass, it does look a little more blurry, and as we round the corner to Great Gable, you will see that the VR frame rate is not as good as Flight Sim 2020, but it's not bad enough to spoil my flying experience. The brightness in Flight Sim 2020 is a bit overpowering, and although the colours are not true to the Lake District, it looks a lot more alive than X Plane11. This is even more evident when you watch this on a phone. If the glare was as bad as this in real life, I'd pull down the sun visor or put on sunglasses. Without some way of reducing the brightness, it's like looking at an overexposed photo. Even by adding overcast cloud cover, the colours still seem too light in the high ground of Cumbria. Compare this to some real footage of Wasdale and Scarfell, and you can see what I mean about the colours. Look how strong the grass colours are and how dark the lake is. It isn't blinding us with flickering reflections. I like the X Plane version of Lingmel Beck in Wasdale Head. It's not flooded and reflecting like Flight Sim 2020. Most of the year this river looks rocky like this, and if it's flooded, it's fast flowing white water. As we make a gentle climbing left turn, we can take a good look at Scarfell and Scarfell Pike. Being the highest mountain in England, it sees lots of visitors, so if you have either walked it or flown over it, please comment in this video whether you think the X Plane or the Flight Sim 2020 simulation is the best representation. From a slightly slower aeroplane at a lower altitude, this is real footage of Scarfell. I don't like the colours used on here. Sorry, force of habit. But joking aside, look how rocky and rugged this terrain actually is. Back to Flight Sim 2020 in the Air Matchy MB339 from India Fox Techo, we'll make the same pass over Scarfell and compare it to X Plane, and the real footage. I had hoped for a fix for the trees, which seem to sprout like weeds, even growing on the boulder screes of the steepest Lake District mountains, but sadly Microsoft forgot to spray the virtual weed killer during this update. Another clip from the real world, over the same part of Scawfell. Note the absence of trees. In X Plane, we take a right over Burnmuir Tarn and head down the Eskdale Valley all the way to the coast. The next real clip is actually in between Ennerdale and Wasdale, but I thought it was a good example of the vivid colours that you see in the Lake District. The murky appearance of X Plane in comparison to the sharpness of Flight Sim is down to less sophisticated light modelling. Even the smallest objects or undulations in the ground cast a shadow in Flight Sim 2020, and I think this is what makes Flight Sim screenshots look like real photos. From the vivid colours in this clip, we go to a very beige looking Eskdale in Flight Sim 2020. Going back to the original question in this video, can both of these sims cope with the demands of low-level VR in fast jets? I would say yes. If I had to choose between one or the other, I would say that depends if you want to fly accurate formation multiplayer flying or not. If I'm flying low-level single player, then I would fly X Plane. First reason being that the Orbex True Earth add-on scenery for X Plane is more accurate in terms of colour and landmarks. The second reason is that I want to fly the Hawk T1. There is a version of the Hawk, the US Navy beefed up version, the Goshawk, due for release in Flight Sim 2020, but it is quite different from the T1 in many ways. I'll certainly be buying the Goshawk from India Fox Techo, as they've done such a good job of the MB339 that we are flying in this video. Coming up on the right is Muncaster Castle. Orbex have modelled this landmark well, whereas Flight Sim 2020, even after the update, has approximated it as a similar sized modern industrial building. Attention to detail like this, and the sand you can see here in the estuary and beaches, still makes X Plane my go-to sim for solo flying. I'm sure given time, Flight Sim 2020 will address these inaccuracies, and you can't blame them for focusing on the more well-known areas of the UK in this latest update. However, I did notice that the Lake District was specifically mentioned in one of the update screenshots, although it's hard to see exactly what has been improved. We do have pre-update footage, so there will be a video coming soon comparing pre and post update flights through the Lake District low flying area LFA 17. With Microsoft promoting Flight Sim 2020 to a wider audience, clearly a lot of effort has gone into the wow factor in terms of visuals. With Flight Sim 2020 about to launch on Xbox consoles, Microsoft must be applauded for closing the gap between niche and mainstream gaming. I know a lot of hardcore simmers will balk at the term gaming, but that's just a label. I've been a simmer for over 30 years, and I've been a qualified real world pilot for 16 years. I don't regard Flight Sim 2020 as a game. Okay, I'm not a fast jet pilot, but if I use VR in a single engine piston plane, about the only thing that separates Flight Sim 2020 from the real thing is the lack of motion cues, and that only makes it harder than in real life to fly. Lack of motion cues can be fixed by buying a motion platform, but financially that's out of reach for most people. The PC I'm running these sims on is almost out of reach for me. The i9 processor and the RTX 3080 graphics card is near the top spec available right now, and right now the RTX 3080s aren't available due to such high demand. Demand no doubt driven by a combination of lockdowns and the release of Flight Sim 2020. The lack of clarity in ground textures is evident here in X Plane, and this does make the final stages of landing a little more difficult. Compare the same short final on Flight Sim 2020 and the difference is quite startling. The ground textures here do make judging your height much easier, and that always results in a better landing. Having visited Walney many times by air in real life, I can vouch that the X Plane version is a much more faithful representation, but even though the Flight Sim 2020 version has approximated buildings, they are at least in the right place and look about the right size. But let's not forget that for the moment, X Plane11 is still a strong contender for those flying in more rural parts of the UK. In Flight Sim 2020, most of the farmers' fields and grass strips that I use in real life are still surrounded by tower blocks even after the UK update. But in time, I'm sure that there will be a way of reporting these minor scenery bugs on a map, or at least OrbX will work the magic like they did in X Plane to come up with a scenery add-on to sort the full UK out. Externally, both jets look brilliant, and it's hard to say which one looks best. As I clamber out of these virtual cockpits, I'll let you decide. I must admit, I didn't notice this guy in the back of the MB339 when I got in, but I did have that feeling someone was watching me while I was flying. Thanks for watching.